When jawboning stops working, is it time to change tactics? Hi, everyone, and welcome to another week of Insights brought to you by Ainslie Bullion and the Gold and Silver Standard. It's Monday, so Alex is back, and she's going to delve into everything central banks through the lens of jawboning today, which is a topic I'm finding quite interesting from what we've discussed so far. So how's it going, Alex?
Really well. How about you today?
Yeah, very good. Very hot up here in Brisbane, but we're supposed to get some rain, so we'll see how that goes. um, you brought up a really interesting topic today, I think, this idea of jawboning. So can you start off by just telling us what it is and how we came to even use this term in the first place?
All right. So jawboning is something called moral suasion. It basically is you say something, whether you think it's going to happen or not going to happen, you are saying it to get an outcome. So by central banks constantly saying, we are going to raise rates, they are hoping they don't have to raise them as high as they think they might have to, because in saying what they're going to do, it may temper demand and inflation may drop. It was first termed in 1969 Time. The magazine back then said Lyndon Johnson at the time was jawboning. Interestingly enough, he was jawboning against inflation at the time. With the Vietnam War, they were having similar inflation problems that went from, I think, about 1.5% to 6.9% in 1969. And then what happened through the 70s was, despite the jawboning going on, it didn't stop inflation. So it was termed exactly the same time frame a similar inflation period. It's worked incredibly well against disinflation from basically the GFC. It worked brilliantly well, but it doesn't seem to be working this time. And I can tell you in history, it didn't work last time when it was first invented, so to speak.
Right. So it's something that a concept that's been around for a long time. It's really just talking your book or talking what you want people to think. But the history of that working is maybe not as good as it seems.
Yeah, I mean, today's article was about it being dubious in times of inflation, and that has been proven in history. And actually, it worked really well through disinflation. And so, we were exploring today why that's the case.
Right. And so that's probably something or if we can figure that out, you would hope that the Fed could figure that out and realize that it's a tool that needs to be used in specific circumstances by the sounds of that. So, you can't just use it in times like now where it might be the wrong time to use it. I really loved a line. I just wanted to bring up this line. You use this line, Bernanke boomer doctrine, and that just cracked me up, but maybe that was just me. We've all, anyone who's sort of looked at the history of what's going on with central bank policy knows that Ben Bernanke was a major force in policy and decision making and the way he thought about it. This concept of helicopter Ben. Can you give us a little bit of background about the role Ben Bernanke played in all of this?
So he obviously used jawboning consistently after the GFC, and his doctrine, which he actually wrote in 2002, then applied to basically how the US and the world tackled the GFC. So in 2008, when the GFC hit, 2006, on the back of his doctrine, Bernanke became the Fed chairman. And then he was able to use his doctrine, which, I mean, in all honesty, worked very well. So he had three principles. The first principle was having this buffer zone for inflation. So this is post-GFC, there's disinflation going on and inflation's dropping. And he'd always said his first principle is there's a buffer zone, so 1% to 3%. So this is this 2% target that most of the countries try to adopt for inflation. Now, that's based off Bernanke's doctrine. The second one is basically central banks need to do everything they can to prevent a financial crisis. And that's where, in his principle 2, he started talking about helicopter money. Now, helicopter money, interestingly enough, is something that is meant to happen once, and you are meant to know it is not going to happen again. But since 2008, how many times has QE been used to stop disinflation. And then during COVID, we talk about a massive misread. Money was thrown at a problem, helicopter money, probably more so than even quantitative easing, because it was given straight to businesses and straight to individuals.
Which was pretty much the definition, wasn't it, at that time, like giving people money directly?
I'd say that's closer to helicopter money than possibly QE, but they're similar in their outcomes. And so that was done then. But helicopter money, the only way it works is if it's a one-off and people know it's a one-off. It is not a one-off anymore. It is expected. And then just finishing up with Bernanke's doctrine, principle 3 is that if inflation is low, you've got to jump in and really smash down the interest rates, which is, again, what they did in COVID with no data. So they've come in, they've thrown helicopter money at a problem that wasn't there, and they've thrown, dropped interest rates to negative 0.1%, depending on the country. So they've applied his principle. Now, we know this time when you use that principle to tackle something that is not a problem at the time, it's caused inflation, and it's caused, I guess, what has happened previously through the Vietnam War in the 1970s, where it's sort of looking at that high inflation, and it doesn't seem to matter what they do with interest rates. It's not dropping that quickly.
So is that the link that you're sort of making there between why it works during periods of deflation and not in inflation? Because, well, can you just maybe elaborate a little bit further on why you think it works much more effectively in one environment versus the other?
So I like to wake up and watch videos in the middle of the night a lot. And the other night I woke up and saw that Powell was being interviewed by Rubenstein and thought this would be interesting to watch. Now, I watched it. It was a 40-minute interview. The questions were not particularly hard, but his answers were neutral to hawkish, in my opinion. So, one of the questions was, if you'd known non-farm payroll, would you have raised rates more? And Powell, response was, well, we didn't know it, and possibly, or not possibly. He never answered it directly. But then he talked about how non-farm payroll numbers might feed into the service sector, which makes up 56% of the CPI, and that's not a good thing. Mm-hmm. But because he did not directly, I believe, say, we will, non-farm payroll would have made us lift rates more, his comments were termed as dovish, and the US dollar dropped in strength again, and everything rose up again. They were not dovish, they were neutral at best, if not hawkish. And so what I was thinking about is people like an outcome that benefits themselves. It's called toxic positivity. So that basically you want a positive outcome. So positive outcome is interest rates don't go up as high, my mortgage is safe, everything's okay. So you hear a neutral, if not slightly hawkish comment, you actually decide it's dovish because that's what you want. And I just think the financial markets right now have this toxic positivity going on where everyone wants the right answer for themselves. And then we've got over the top of that what's happened with this helicopter money where they've always been rescued. So they know it's going to be okay. So, I mean, how much has Fed pivot been talked about? And, quantitative tightening, not going to last. We're going to go back to quantitative easing. Well, this is the outcome of this misuse of helicopter money and the misuse of, people of jawboning. You are not going to get the answer you want this time.
And I actually wonder, this is a thought that just came to me while you were talking about that in the past, we probably haven't had this much access. You think about how even the fact you can wake up in the middle of the night, probably on your phone, and watch a speech by a Fed governor across somewhere around the world. The fact that all of that is the case means that more people have access to the exact same access to this jawboning. So it's not even a local phenomenon in that scenario, is it? Because then that would have informed your decision and informs anyone who's listening or interested in the market. So you can get a situation that we seem to be in now where like you've said, positive is positive, neutral is somehow positive, and it probably actually has
Even
a
more
bigger
fish is positive.
impact, and it has a bigger impact than it ever would have had previously.
Yeah, look, it's clearly jawboning is not working. How about that? Whether or not no jawboning is better, I don't know, but it is not a tool that is going to work this time. And it is, and for all the same reason that Bernanke doctrine worked, it worked in disinflation. It was about disinflation. It was never about inflation.
Yeah, and you're not saying that it doesn't work. You're saying that it's a tool that needs to be used in the right environment, and this is not that right environment.
But I'm also saying its misuse has created this toxic positivity.
And that's created this toxic positivity environment where everyone just is no longer listening to reality because they're looking beyond that. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's quite an interesting angle to approach this all on, and that's why I found it really interesting today. So where do we go from here? What can central banks do in your mind that is better? Because if that doesn't work, how do you approach that? And are we in the same situation as the US here in Australia?
I think we're probably in a more difficult situation because we are controlled more by the actions of the US. So that is not the same situation. But ultimately, looking back at when Lyndon Johnson first started using jawboning, 1980s, Reagan, fiscal constraints stopped it. It wasn't the central banks. I mean, we all know that interest rates got to 15, 16% around the world. It did not stop what was going on. Lawrence Summers, who's a Harvard economist, in February 2021, warned the Biden government about possible inflation, huge inflation on the back of his stimulus package. And then look at today, all the headlines in the newspapers at the moment are low might not last another term. And he's in front of all the politicians being grilled at the moment. Well, what solved this was not monetary policy. It was fiscal constraint. And unless this populism that the governments all want and this overspending stops, we are just going to keep going. I'm not convinced there's much that can be done about inflation with monetary policy anymore.
Yep, and that does make sense. And in the Australian context, do you think really it is just that fact that we're constrained because we have to follow what's going on over there?
Well, no, I think we're just in a more difficult situation that if they don't do it, it doesn't mean as much to us.
Yeah, right. So we can still, there's nothing stopping us from being more fiscally responsible in that environment. It's just difficult against the monetary policy backdrop. You're still going to have to follow suit.
That's exactly right.
Yep. Okay. Well, thanks, Alex. That heaps of effort into the news today. Really interesting topic, and really appreciate that. I found it really interesting, and it's additional perspective I haven't heard anywhere else. So always love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it was a good topic, and if anyone's got time, they should watch that Powell speech and decide if they actually think it was dovish, because I just don't understand how the market did that.
So I'll next time I wake up at middle of the night, I'll pop that on. Advice from Alex won't knock me back to sleep, sure. Thanks to everyone else for watching as well. Remember, you can reach out to us with any questions or comments. Social platforms, that's we do our best to answer anything on there. So make sure you do if you have anything you'd like to add to the conversation. I'll be back on Wednesday with the next installment. So until then, everyone, hope you have a great start to the week.